many times in the past people come and ask me what is the secret, and they want the 5-minute discussion for me to be able to tell them how to win a World Championships. And I know that Ingo would also have had that question asked so many times in the past as well. And of course we say, well, there is no 5-minute answer to this. This is not something that you can answer in a few words or in half an hour to teach people. And I always used to say, well, there's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of dedication, and it's a lot of focus and all those things. I wanted to talk to you about that because we often haven't talked about this in the past. We've been in competitions and that sort of thing, and see what your view of that was as well, and in trying to answer this question for people that want to know what it is that defines the difference between people winning the comp and not winning. Sometimes it's luck, but there certainly is another element there that we can't define. I find I have a lot of difficulty in defining, and it would be nice to try and quantify what that is. Somehow touch on those moments when things are really difficult and the decision that we have to make is very difficult, and yet for some reason when you're in the zone, or when you've been flying so well, and when you're at a very high state of competency, that you actually make the correct decisions. What is it that we actually do? What is it that people do in those situations that's different to others, and how do we actually go about the process of making those decisions? Have you got any ideas on what that could be? Or
yes, I can look back in my life, and my first World Comps I won when I was 35, and the last one I won at 47. So between those years I had my peak, maybe the best power of concentration and also enough experience. You have to have maybe years of experience to win a World Championships, but also a lot of power of concentration. Of course, there were some younger world champions like Sebastian Kahler and Helmut Reichmann. They were just in the early 20s when they won first, and so there's always an exception, but with me it was like a slow process, hard work towards the goal, and to achieve the goal I had to gather a lot of experience and still had enough concentration, whereas now at old age I lack concentration. I can't think of all the complex problems of cross-country flying at the one time. I just do it bit by bit, and I'm slowing down. I can feel it myself. I'm slowing down markedly.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, I think the statistics show that too, that most world champions, they're very rarely, someone will win a world championship above the age of 50. I don't think that's happened. I'm pretty sure that.
Only Heinz Huth, he was 53 the second time.
And that definitely backs up what you're saying, and I do actually feel that very much myself too. At that age of sometimes around 35 to 45, you're at your peak of your capacity and your experience and your knowledge is your memory is so good, and you can make these decisions very quickly and use it all. But the other thing that really fascinates me too, and I can't answer it, and I have done it myself in the past, is where you make an intuitive decision. And one of the classic ones that people have talked about with you, Ingo, is that when you were flying in Holmes and you won the World Championships, and they mentioned it last night where the other people gave up because Ingo just blew them away at this competition. But I remember the story where it was blue and there were big glides in between thermals,
Yes.
and you pushed on and you pushed on and you pushed on and you found the next 10 knot thermal. Can you remember, or is it possible to give a little bit of insight or your view of what actually happens when you do that, and why did you find that 10 knot thermal when they didn't find it? Have you got any idea of what?
Yeah. I spent quite some time in Hobbs prior to the World Championships. I rented a motor glider and I flew to all turning points, and there are many turning points. I knew all the turning points and what they looked like and what the countryside was around the turning points, and the surface, what it was like, and the possibility of thermal producing countryside. I memorized it all, and in those days I could memorize a lot.
Yes.
And so I was well prepared, maybe better prepared than anybody
The
else.
other guys.
Yes.
And I remember too from the old days when we used to fly too, we developed a bit of a database of thermal sources in the task area, and we probably in this case in Hobbs as well, that you flew to the next thermal, you just said it, thermal generating area or thermal source area.
Yes.
So it's a mental picture or a mental note of where all the good thermal sources are, and I think what I used to do was a technique of maximising my chance of getting the next thermal, like flying to the ridges or the hilly terrain or the whatever it is that
So it's so important to know the countryside where you fly the competition. If you are completely new to the countryside, you have very little chance
of doing that. And I remember when we went to when we went to Uvalde and flew there too. I'm not sure if we hired an aeroplane, but yes, we did hire an aeroplane, fly to a couple of the turn points to the north that we couldn't quite fly to, we weren't going to. But we did that, and I did that at Uvalde as well. I flew to every one of the turn points that were in the turn point list, and made ourselves familiar with those. I know, just remembering that day years and years and years ago when it was a little bit of an enlightenment to me that you did actually do this, that you actually memorised where all the good thermal sources were. I got that 16 knot thermal just to the east of Tocumwal one day and with Shane McCaffrey, and we came back and Shane said, "Oh, Brad got an 18 knot thermal today," and it was 12 for him or something, and it was 18 for me for a while, and an average 16 knots for the whole time. But I remember that day. You remember that day, and you came across to me and asked me exactly where did I find that 16 knot thermal, and I went, this is very interesting.
And it's still a hot spot in the country.
Yes, it is.
No, geological maps. Geological maps with the surface, the soil area, I think it's a Department of Agriculture that issues those maps. There's sand, sandy loam and clay and all sorts of different countries, soil in the countryside, and clay is very bad for thermals and sand is very good. So that's the range. You have to know where all these sandy patches are, and you can fly from sandy patch to another one. I figured it out already in Finland, 1976, when we flew in the World Comps there, because that's a countryside full of lakes and forest, and within the forest there are some rocks, granite rocks from the last ice age, big patches of rocks, and they heat up very well. The water doesn't heat up at all, and the forest is just so. So you have to know where the rocks are, and you have to find a map that shows up all the rocks in the countryside. And that was the first time I was interested in the surface of the countryside, and I applied that to Australia as well. It's work here, because to figure out this map and the feedlots and so on, that is work, isn't it? You have to sit
Yeah,
down
to spend
and,
a lot of time to
yeah,
do this.
to find out. And also you have to work on your soldering and thermaling method so it becomes a routine. So you don't have to think about it. You don't spend any power of concentration on it anymore. You just plan the next step of your flight while you're thermaling. You don't...
It's right, you're not using all your concentration in the thermal. You can if you're so current when you're flying, so like what you're saying is, if you're so current and flying so well, it doesn't require concentration on that. You can think about the other things, like where the next thermal is.
Exactly, and how to round the turning point.
Yes.
You know, that's quite positive, important, you know. With the tailwind into the turning point, you want to be as high as possible, and with the headwind, you want to be as low as you dare. But it's all time saving, you know, if you do it correctly.
Yeah. And we that course we did. Remember the week we had at Tokemore with Terry Cubley and
Norm Bloch.
Norm Bloch, yes, exactly. And Norm, I remember, did that to the extreme one day. He dared much more than us to round the turn point very low. Sort of went round the turn point and climbed away at 500 feet, which actually made a big difference. But we went and tried these things. We actually, these concepts were raised by Ingo, and so at the briefing in the morning, and then we would go off during the day and then try that concept. And then we'd come back and see who did what and how, and we proved that these things actually do work, and that they were very important, you know, so that was good.
Also, we had one experiment, I don't know whether it was in that week, but we placed one glider in the center of the thermal, and two other gliders outside in the adjacent air, and we saw that the wind was much stronger in the adjacent air, and the thermal was not moving as fast. So that proves the theory of shear waves.
It does too, and that the thermal, and this was a concept that I'd never known about, and Ingo pointed this out, that the thermals don't drift as fast as the wind here, because they're a mass and it takes a while to accelerate this mass, all that sort of stuff.
That's right.
And so that raised all these other things, like shear wave was one, but the other concept also was that our structure of where the thermal was in relation to the ground and that sort of thing was changed, was modified by that as well. So that was very enlightening. But the great thing about that course, we studied that week we studied all these things and we thought about them a lot. But we came back with the idea that we had a much greater mental picture of what was actually going on in the air each particular day, so that we could by theoretically looking at what a thermal structure looked like and what happens with the thermal when the wind's blowing from a particular direction, we found it was much better for us than to determine where to find the next thermal and how to fly the turn point or whatever. And that also helped with our concentration as well. That we could then spend more time finding the thermal rather than trying to figure out what was going on. You know, I'm making it a bit complicated there.
So really, dedicated kind of application and theorizing and application like scientists, really.
That's what we did,
Yeah, very much so. And it was a bit of a science in those days. It was quite new. The other thing that I often think about there are a lot of great scientists out there working on this, producing papers, writing books and things, and there was a lot of material that you could actually look at and help.
You remember when we went to WorldComs, parallel to it, there was always a scientific meeting,
yes,
the OSTEF Congress.
The OSTEF Congress.
And when we had a no contest day, we sat into the lectures and could
listen to the future or what was being.
The presentations were very interesting. Helmut Reichmann, he's a professor in university, or he was. He doesn't live anymore. But I think he was the only professor in the world that taught gliding at the university level. Gliding was a subject. I think you can't study gliding in the Australian universities. Yeah.
And did a particularly good job of it too.
Oh,
didn't
yes,
he?
very
He was a
good.
very interesting character that enlightened me and many Australians, because he used to come to Australia quite a bit in the
Yes, he
70s,
did,
the very early 70s.
Yeah.
Flew here.
He flew in our nationals.
Yeah, and that was a great boost for Australian
Yes,
flying.
definitely.
Great boost. He introduced these concepts and things that we hadn't heard of before. And I remember, Ingo, that one of the particular things that I remember in those days, very early in my competition flying days, was that he introduced the concept that I'd never heard of, that the maximum part of the hottest part of the day is around 2 o'clock. So therefore his flight was then planned around the hot part of the day. Now we never used to use that concept. When I flew Skylark 4s and things like that, we'd start the task as soon as the thermals were good enough to go out on track.
Exactly.
Nothing to do with whether we flew the task around the
peak
best
of
part of
the
the
day,
day. Yes, that's right. And that was some great insight. So just basic things like that were introduced by people like this to Australia. It was fascinating for us, wasn't it?
Oh yes, yeah.
To see that.
I'm not a writer, just a pilot.
But a very good one.